Chapter 3, Life is Empty and Meaningless. You see, we as human beings tend to assign meaning to our lives. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say, for example, if I were to say the word teenager. Most of us, in our own mind, would immediately come up with judgments, ideas, or thoughts about what a teenager is. You see, a teenager is just a teenager. A teenager can be many things. But in one person's perspective, a teenager is one thing, and another person's perspective of a teenager is another thing. Why is this different? Because we all have past experiences that are different from everyone else. So we assign meaning, interpretation, judgment upon our life all the time. To stop being depressed, we need to learn that we are not our thoughts. Therefore, we are not the judgments we think about ourselves and not about how we see other things. You see, I learned that as human beings, we tend to be basically two different types of people. We tend to either choose to be fake, we tend to be a personality that is compelled to be a certain way. For example, I tend to be a hard worker. I have no option. I tend to be that way. I also tend to be a humorous person. I know this book doesn't seem that humorous, but I'm usually a very humorous person. And I can't not be this person. Now, if I'm not being my fake self, then I'm being my opposite self, which is a complainer or a victim about life. And it's either one way or the other. Now, there is the third option. There is the option of understanding, identifying when you realize that you are not what you think, then you can begin to create yourself as someone completely different. But for the most part, we are either one way or the other. We are either a compelled person to be this personality type that is part of us, or we tend to be what I call racketeer. Now, the racketeer idea came from back in the 1920s. Back in the 20s, there would be this sweet old lady who ran a candy shop. And behind the sweet old lady, she was selling liquor, she was selling guns, and doing all kinds of illegal activity. But on the surface, on the front, it just looked like a nice old lady who was running a candy shop. So that's where the idea of the racketeer comes. Now, this is the way people are. We have a tendency to be afraid that if people knew who we really are, they wouldn't like us, they wouldn't love us, and therefore we are not okay. This causes us to go to either being this personality that we feel like we need to be in order to be loved, or we feel like we're unlovable and we complain about life, or we see everything that's wrong with life and we feel all miserable about it. We usually are either happy or sad. And what we want to do in this book is identify the third way of being, which is the created self. Now, you may not agree with what the statement of how I just said those things, but I invite you to look at your own life and look at, are there certain type of personalities that you just naturally are? See, most of us had events in our childhood that helped landmark who we are today. For example, when you were a 7-year-old kid and you had something happen to your life that made you decide that you were going to be a certain way in order to compensate for a weakness that you felt inside you. This is what I believe everybody has inside them. And what we want to do is learn that, yes, we have this personality type, but what can we do about this? I'm, for example, always nice, and it sometimes can drive me nuts. And when I get frustrated with myself being nice, that's when I turn to more of my racketeer, complainy, whiny self. And I'm either one or the other. But, like I said before, when I realize that I can actually create myself, create my life, create myself exactly the way I want myself to be, then I have a third option. So I want you to take a moment. I want you to decide about what kind of person that you want to become. Do you want to be happy? What kind of income do you want to make? What kind of car do you want to drive? What kind of relationship do you want to be in? Decide you're going to be that person. Choose that path. And I recommend that you write it down. Write down what this person looks like, and then you can read this statement to yourself twice a day in the present tense. Read it as if this person is already becoming you. You are already becoming this person. And I think you're going to find that this is going to have a dramatic impact on how you see the world, and you won't necessarily feel like you need to be depressed. Habits can change. We are a creature of habits, So you can change yourself. You can change your patterns of thought. Once you feel like you have power over your life, your thoughts will change. I have a reference for several books that I'd like to recommend to you. And I believe by reading these books, you will start to begin slowly to change how you habitually think. But again, as I mentioned earlier, change doesn't necessarily need to happen slowly. If you can realize now that you are not your thoughts and therefore you can create your life, you are going to have a huge jump on your depression. Thank you so much for reading, and I look forward to hearing from you and hearing about your success in overcoming depression.